For Women's History Month, we're taking a look at another women's organization that thrived in Goldsboro and Mount Olive during the 20th century, the Business and Professional Women's Club. These were local chapters of the North Carolina Federation of Business and Professional Women's Clubs. This is only one of many women's organizations that existed at the time to support business and professional women. Other organizations include the American Business Women's Association, the Business and Professional Women's League, a Black women's professional organization active in both Goldsboro and Mount Olive, and various other organizations created to support specific professions. This presentation will focus on the Business and Professional Women's Clubs in Goldsboro and Mount Olive that would eventually merge to form the Southern Winn Business and Professional Women's Club. Using scrapbooks from our local history collection, microfilm of local newspapers, and other primary sources, we will provide a few highlights on the history of this organization.
Before we begin this program, we would like to recognize and thank a few organizations that have made this possible. The Wayne County Public Library received a North Carolina Cares Humanities Relief Grant from the North Carolina Humanities Council. Funding for North Carolina Cares has been provided by the National Endowment for the Humanities as a part of the Corona Aid Relief and Economic Security Act Economic Stabilization Plan. The rights of women and workers were beginning to gain greater recognition in the early 20th century. After years of activism, the 19th Amendment passed in 1920, granting American women the right to vote. The cause for women's suffrage started many years prior, beginning to really take root in America during the mid-1800s. The world's first women's rights convention took place in Seneca Falls, New York in 1848. Wayne County women made an early impact. The Goldsboro Women's Club was formed in 1899, much earlier than the National Federation of Women's Clubs, which was organized in 1902. While the Women's Club was not affiliated with BPW, the emergence of these organizations depicts an increasing trend of women using organizational structures to leverage influence on a larger scale than individual activism would allow.
World War I was an event that made a significant impact on women in the workforce. This was also the case in Goldsboro. Some local women, like Mrs. Bertie Rouse, served in the military during this time. Miss Rouse was an early active member of the Goldsboro BPW. She left Goldsboro in 1918 to serve in World War I at the Naval Operating Base in Norfolk, Virginia, when she was 25. After returning from service, she became an active member of the Goldsboro BPW and worked as a secretary at a local insurance company. The Business and Professional Women's Club of Goldsboro was founded in 1920, not long after the first national convention. Dr. Lena Madsen Phillips founds the National Federation of Business and Professional Women's Clubs in 1919. A product of the Progressive Era, Dr. Phillips was the first woman to earn a law degree from the University of Kentucky, practicing law first in her hometown of Nicholasville, Kentucky, before moving to New York, where she became more aware of social justice issues and developed her commitment to advocacy. Dr. Phillips organized the National Federation of Business and Professional Women's Clubs with the goal of connecting businesswomen and working women in a way that allowed them to advocate for women's workplace issues. She believed that a strong organizational structure was essential to this goal. This idea is perhaps best summed up in the following quote from Lena Madsen Phillips. "You are now pioneers in the dream of peace and social justice, of international understanding and goodwill. This dream will come to pass. It matters little whether you or I live to see the day. It is only important that each of us struggle without pause towards that day." Phillips felt that economic equity was an important factor in women gaining equal rights, and like many women in her era, she believed in structured organizations as a means to make lasting change. From 1920 to 2018, the percentage of the workforce made up by women has almost doubled. However, the challenges faced by working women and advocated for by women's groups remain present. The National Association of Business and Professional Women and the North Carolina BPW is currently raising awareness on the impact of COVID and economic downturn on women's professional lives. A recent article published in the Triangle Business Journal notes that while the last 5 recessions have impacted men more than women, the recent COVID pandemic has disproportionately impacted working women.
The Goldsboro Business and Professional Women's Club took part in the Women's Activities exhibit in New York as one of the top contributors. The organization would continue to provide travel and development opportunities to members, including a tour of the United Nations headquarters in the 1950s. The club raised more than $1,200, a modern equivalent of over $15,000, at an indoor fair to support the education of local women. Much of this contributed to an educational fund to help Goldsboro women take commercial or education courses at the college of their preference. Some of the proceeds also went towards educational funding for local high school girls.
Locally, Wayne County's BPW in Goldsboro provided monetary support for women seeking to further their education, sponsored scholarships to Girl Scout camp, and offered training on public speaking and other topics relevant to women in the workplace. Wayne Duplin BPW, an outgrowth of the Mount Olive Club, established the local Joyce Thigpen Memorial Scholarship, which would provide 76 scholarship awards totaling over $26,000 by the year of 2012. These efforts helped to create spaces that empowered and supported women in their career success from youth through adulthood. Organization at the local, state, and national level enabled the club to offer a wider variety of resources than would be available from a strictly local club. For example, in 1925, the National Federation established its first scholarship fund, the LCG Riddick Scholarship, as a loan fund to provide financial support for women's education. Still in existence today, this funding opportunity is now a scholarship. Wayne Duplin BPW in Mount Olive sponsored the winning applicant in 1988 and again in 1993. 3 other state-level scholarship funds would emerge in North Carolina, including the Ruth Moss Easterling Scholarship, honoring the longest-serving woman in the legislature from North Carolina. Easterling's commitment to civic engagement closely mirrored the objectives of the club at the state and local levels. She helped found the North Carolina Commission on the Status of Women, now known as the Council for Women and Youth Involvement. The Young Careerist Program was another program established in the 1960s by the BPW to support young women at the early stages of their professional development. In the picture below, Selena Jordan Bennett, the 1989 District 7 Young Careerist, was sponsored by the Mount Olive BPW chapter. Mrs. Bennett was an elementary school counselor at Wayne County Public Schools and went on to compete in the state-level BPW Young Careerist program. The image at top shows Mrs. Linda Crawford and her nursing class in 1962. Mrs. Linda Crawford received an award from the Goldsboro BPW for being the most professional woman in her class. You can see here that the BPW has honored women in education and their careers throughout the 20th century. Public health and community welfare were also causes forwarded by the club. In the 1950s, the Goldsboro BPW received recognition for their support of the Wayne County Chest Clinic, a long-standing local effort to stop the spread of tuberculosis. In the 1950s, the club also donated an isolate incubator to Wayne County Hospital. This increased the ability of Wayne County doctors to care for premature infants. Fundraising and volunteer activities in Wayne County throughout the years included work with the Salvation Army and other local nonprofits, as well as local fundraising efforts to assist the community. You can see here that an early philanthropy event included raising money for fire sufferers in New Bern. Some other examples of this philanthropy are also shown at left.
Informed voting and civic engagement remain important causes of the organization at the state and national level. In Wayne County, the BPW hosted politicians at member meetings to discuss their platforms, advocated for women's presence at the ballot box, and took part in bipartisan political advocacy related to causes relevant to women and children.
From public speaking workshops in the 1950s to more formalized programs, The group worked to highlight and enhance professional opportunities for women. 2 programs emerged in the 1960s to provide structured professional development opportunities for career women at different points in their professional lives. The Young Careerist program, mentioned earlier, was organized in 1964 and aimed at providing professional development and learning opportunities for young women under the age of 35. The Individual Development Program provided more formalized leadership and professional development training for women at any stage of their career. National Business Women's Week was a highlight of the club's programming at all levels of the organization. This week calls attention to the achievements of working women, provides an opportunity to advocate for women in the workplace, and connects women with resources to help develop a more equitable working environment. You can see here the streets of Goldsboro celebrating National Business Women's Week in the 1950s. Included at left is also a small pamphlet that was given to women in the BPW with reading recommendations that help women develop professional, political, and social awareness.
Guest editorials published in the Goldsboro News Argus give a glimpse into causes important to members of the BPW in the 1950s. These were published to highlight the voices of local women on current issues during Business and Professional Women's Week.
Goldsboro and Mount Olive Business and Professional Women's Clubs would eventually merge to form the Southern Wayne Business and Professional Women's Club. The name of that organization would change again in 2006 to the Wayne Duplin Business and Professional Women's Club to better reflect the scope of the organization. Both Goldsboro and Mount Olive appear to have had BPW groups in the 1950s, although the Goldsboro group appears to have been the most consistently active. In 1965, Goldsboro hosted the State Federation of Business and Professional Women's Clubs. 10 years later, in 1975, the Mount Olive Business and Professional Women's Club organized under the sponsorship of the Goldsboro Club. In 1988, the name of that group changed to the Southern Wayne Business and Professional Women's Club, and in 1994, the Goldsboro Business and Professional Women's Club merged into this organization. Organizational funding from the Goldsboro Group rolled into funds for the Stephen Spence Scholarship Fund in honor of 2 past Goldsboro BPW women. The group enjoyed consistently strong membership throughout the 20th century and gained considerable press coverage, offering a wide array of social, educational, and philanthropic activities for local working women. Wayne Duplin Business and Professional Women's Club is currently no longer active, but its history remains a testament to the achievements of local working women. Many of the women involved with the BPW made significant contributions to history. It would be impossible to highlight all of these women. Here are a few women from the club documentation that we wanted to shine a spotlight on. Each woman was unique in her contributions to county and state history. All contributed to the common goal of elevating women in the workplace by breaking barriers, setting an example for professional women, and advocating for the causes that they found meaningful.
Miss Gertrude Wheel was born into a self-made, prominent Jewish merchant family in Goldsboro. Her mother, Mina, was a large influence on her civic work at a young age. From 1895 to 1897, at the age of 16, Gertrude attended one of the top liberal arts boarding schools in America, the Horace Mann School, which was a part of Columbia University in New York until 1940. She went on to matriculate at Smith College, a private liberal arts, historically women's college in Massachusetts. During her time at Smith, Wheel was exposed to the work of progressive reformers, attended lectures on gender inequalities, and attended lectures on women's role in confronting social justice. These experiences generating the basis for Wheel's future work during the election of 1900. Women had not been given the right to vote in the United States, but some women at Smith College, including Wheel, participated in mock presidential elections. In 1901, she graduated from Smith and moved back to her hometown of Goldsboro, where she would actively begin her civic career, avid philanthropy, and eventually would hold numerous positions in women's clubs and organizations at the state and national level.
Mrs. Nancy Winbon Chase was born to a farming family in Eureka, North Carolina, and remained a strong supporter of Eastern North Carolina agriculture throughout her life in public service. She was active in the North Carolina Farm Bureau, chairing the Women's Division for a decade. She was the first woman to serve as a voting delegate at the Farm Bureau's National Convention. Mrs. Chase served 8 terms in the state legislature as a representative from Wayne County and was known particularly for her work in education and mental health advocacy. She was presented with the Distinguished Service Award by the North Carolina Public Health Association in 1972, served in various capacities on state-level mental health initiatives, served on the Governor's Study Committee for Architectural Barriers, and on the board of the North Carolina Land Use Planning Conference. At about 5 feet tall, she was once described as a compact version of a nuclear reactor, while Governor Jim Hunt described her as one of the most effective legislators that North Carolina has ever had. She spoke to BPW groups throughout the state of North Carolina, particularly in eastern North Carolina. Mrs. Laurelle Martin earned her BA from Greensboro College and her MA from East Carolina University. She also completed further graduate work at Appalachian State University and Duke University's Marine Lab. Originally from Onslow County, Mrs. Martin moved to her husband's hometown of Mount Olive following their marriage. She was a strong advocate for education, serving for 30 years as the chairman of the science department at Mount Olive College, now University of Mount Olive, where she taught multiple courses. She also founded the Read to Succeed program at Carver Elementary School. She was extremely active in the First Baptist Church of Mount Olive, serving on almost every committee. Notably, she was president of the Women's Missionary Union and the first woman deacon to serve communion as chair of the diaconate. The annual Martin Lecture at the University of Mount Olive is given in her honor. Thank you for joining us today. We hope you've learned a little bit more about the women of Wayne County and just one of the groups that help them excel professionally.